Braude.
Wait a second. See, this is what it's like dealing with this woman all the time. By the way, I'm Jim Braude. Fair enough?
Prove it? Can you prove it?
Can we start this whole thing all over again and try to get it right, please? Thank you.
This is Talk of New England. With Jim Braude on New England Cable News.
Welcome to Talk of New England, and I'm Jim Braude. I like that better. Spring has sprung. How do I know? Nothing to do with flowers in bloom or groundhogs. No, it's much more obvious than that. Listen for the sound of feet. Politicians' feet as they run at breakneck speed toward the middle. Democrats act like Republicans. Republicans act like Democrats. That's a sure sign it's spring in an election year. But there's one exception to this sorry state, and that's ballot questions. You're either for them or against them. There's no middle ground. This reality has provided a rich history of lawmaking, or attempted lawmaking, in Massachusetts. Both Prop 2.5 and the bottle bill won voter approval, while attempts to close down nuclear plants and to cut $2 billion in taxes in 1990 did not. 1994, again, is a hot ballot season. If you went to the supermarket today, you probably were approached by someone asking for your signature to help put a question on the ballot. Several weeks ago on this show, we debated one of them, term limits. In the future, we'll visit campaign finance reform and others. In all, as many as 11 questions might reach the November ballot, an all-time record in Massachusetts. But tonight, it's the Grad tax, the campaign sponsored by my organization, which would replace the state's current flat tax with one where tax rates are higher for the wealthy, lower for everyone else. A question which many say will be a centerpiece of the fall gubernatorial campaign, with Bill Weld a strong opponent, and the three Democrats supporting the plan to various degrees. Tonight we'll debate all that's debatable about the Grad tax, but a few things are beyond dispute. First, that 35 states already have it, as does the federal government. And second, that Massachusetts voters have rejected the question 4 times in the past, most recently in 1976. So let the games begin. With me on today's show are Mitchell Kertzman, Chairman and CEO of the PowerSoft Corporation. Barbara Anderson, I think you've seen her a minute ago, of Citizens for Limited Taxation, and Representative Ron Gauch, a Republican from Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining me. As I hope you know out there, to get the Grad tax on the ballot, there are really 2 questions. One that would amend the Constitution, one that provides a rate structure. The rate structure gets on the ballot if we get those signatures. But the constitutional amendment, which has been approved in what is called a joint session of the legislature, all members of the House, which you sit in, Representative, and all members of the Senate, has to do this again. It's met 13 times since it once voted approval. And the rumor, according to the Boston Globe and the Herald, is it might not happen. This show may be premature. We may never see the Grad tax on the ballot. What's your call on this question?
Well, I have no idea, Jim. That's up to the leadership, and it's a good call. I have no idea.
Well, we collected 100,000 signatures on this thing a couple of years ago, and I know it's a fairly safe bet you're against the graduated income tax.
Absolutely.
That's why you're here. Do you support our right to get a vote from this constitutional convention?
Absolutely.
You do?
Absolutely.
Hey, so do I.
How about you, Barbara?
That's an easy question. But I also supported our right to get a vote on term limitation in the constitutional amendment for all the good that did us. I also supported our right to get a vote in the Constitutional Convention in 1979 on a constitutional tax limitation measure for all the good that did us. So lots of luck, Mr. Braude.
Term limits in the first round died. That tax limitation died, and I guess that ultimately led to Prop 2.5 as a law change. What's your call, though, back to you, Representative? You think it's going to happen?
I think it's going to happen, yes.
And why, might I ask?
Well, I think the pressure is on everybody to make it happen. After the fiasco we went through with the term limit situation, I don't think they're going to let that happen again.
So democracy is our strongest shot.
I hope so.
Mitchell, let me turn to you. As I said in the opening a couple of seconds ago, this thing has been on the ballot a mere 4 times. When I often say it's been defeated 4 times, Barbara will occasionally, but she's too polite tonight, correct me and say it hasn't been defeated, it's been crushed. Most recently in 1976 by what, 73 to 27?
Don't count on my being polite.
46% margin.
Crushed by every blue-collar, working-class city and town in Massachusetts.
And she's right on this.
Crushed.
What's different in 1994? Why is the 5th time going to be the right time?
Well, there's 3 arguments that have traditionally carried the weight against and the vote against the Grad tax that are different this time. The first argument has been that the voter is buying a pig in a poke by voting to amend the Constitution and repeal the constitutional prohibition against the Grad tax without knowing what the legislature might do with the rate structure. This time we've got an actual specific rate structure on the ballot that they can vote for, and as we know from our experience with Prop 2.5, the legislature is very reluctant to change legislation that has been put on the ballot by the voters. The second thing that's substantively different is that in the past the business community has been virtually completely and monolithically against the graduated income tax. My presence here indicates that that's very different this year. Significant members of the business community will be for the graduated income tax, particularly because of its pro-investment provisions. The third thing is that the argument has been that you can't trust the legislature. What we're doing now, though, we're in an era where we've had 2 years of what I think even you perhaps would admit is perhaps the most pro-business legislature that we've ever seen in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They've passed investment tax credits, research and development tax credits. They voted with myself and the business community to repeal the corporate tax disclosure that you put on the ballot.
The one mistake you've made in the last couple of years,
That's
Mitchell.
right. So I think that the argument that you can't trust this legislature just doesn't hold water.
Well, let's start at the top with that, Representative. You're one of those 200 people that we allegedly can't trust. The Boston Globe did a poll the other day. The Becker Institute did a poll. Said people love the graduated income tax, but wait a second. As soon as you tell them that the legislature has the right to change that rate structure somewhere in the future, support plummets. Which side are you on that question?
I think it's a dangerous, precedent for a graduated income tax because I sit on the legislature and I can see that it's always a deterrent when you've got a tax that's going to affect all your constituents. But the minute you start breaking that up so that you can start whacking this group this year, another group another year, there's going to be tremendous tax increases down the line, and I think that's a fallacy. It's a bad tax. The legislature is going to have a field day with this tax.
When did you enter the legislature, by the way?
I entered a year and a half ago.
Well, before you were there, I'm sure you remember, as a citizen, in 1990, Barbara had on the ballot a huge tax rollback. That's when Mitchell and I met. That was under the flat tax system. Largest tax increase, according to Barbara, in state history. Affected everybody. The voters chose to reject that tax cut. If the legislature prior to you was able to raise everybody's taxes in such huge numbers with a flat tax, why do you operate on the assumption that with a graduated tax it's going to be easier?
Oh, it's definitely going to be easy because they don't raise it. If you look back, we haven't raised taxes in the last few years because it's been a tough thing for the legislature to do. I mean, especially with this governor in, he has not raised taxes. The legislature has followed him on that. And the minute you start making it easier for the legislature to raise taxes, the graduated income tax would do that. You're going to see tremendous tax increases.
You have to remember, Jim, and I'm sure you do, we were on the ballot with question 3 to cut the taxes back that they raised. With a graduated income tax, we can't even get on the ballot because only one small group of taxpayers will be hit at any given time, so only one small group of taxpayers will be angry enough to go out and stand on a street corner collecting signatures at any given time. So therefore, you simply give the legislature the ability to do whatever it wants. I mean, Mitchell doesn't hang around at the State House, so he doesn't understand what it's like at 4 o'clock in the morning during the budget debate when they come out and change subchapter S legislation as they've done in the past, when they raise tax rates, and when they simply change the structure of the taxes that are there without people even knowing it's a rate increase. You have to really see them in action before you can believe how little you can trust them.
You're lucky enough not to be there at 4 o'clock in the morning. What's wrong with their argument? That seems to be the most powerful argument with the public. Don't trust those horrible legislators. This is going to give them some new power to nail you in the middle of the night.
Well, first of all, I don't see it as a fundamentally new power, but the argument against this goes along with why they asked Willie Sutton why he robbed banks, and he says, because that's where the money is. If you want to raise taxes, if you want to raise any significant amount of money, the only place that exists is with the broad numbers of the middle class. You can't get very much by taxing the rich. The poor don't have any money. So you've got to go after the middle class in big numbers. Bill Clinton's very well-known tax increase on the wealthy didn't really raise very much revenue. It didn't make a substantial dent in the federal budget deficit. And therefore, you've got to go after large numbers of voters in order to get any significant revenue under any tax system, graduated or not.
You're telling us that all of us, certainly me, we're going to get a tax cut, and all they're going to do with this graduated income tax statute is raise taxes on you. And by the way, I don't know about all these businessmen who are allegedly supporting the grad tax. Every businessman I know, every business organization I know is passionately opposed to the grad tax because Paul Tsongas said that this is just another example of anti-business ideology, which is the last thing this state needs. So don't create this bandwagon effect that makes anybody think that you're not one of 2 or 3 businessmen who want to raise taxes and get the tax breaks for themselves.
Let's start with some facts first, because I think we're getting ahead of our audience. In 1995, the first year this thing would be in effect if it passed, what Weld, the Department of Revenue, and obviously Weld is against this, and what we agree upon is that 92% of the voters will see their taxes go down. That will not be funded by further service cuts, as most of the tax cuts that Weld is funded, but in fact by raising taxes on the wealthiest 8%. That's the raising that Barbara talks about. So that you're clear, what Barbara and Representative Gauch are talking about is after that first year, they think all hell's going to break loose, the legislature is going to have a field day, but at least we agree on what the impact of this is in 1995. Now, so at least in 1995, you're both in the position of opposing this by saying we're against tax relief for 92% of people. We're against the provision that provides water relief. Wait, let me finish.
No,
for low middle income people. You're against all these provisions.
It's a trick. That's why we're obviously an organization called Citizens for Limited Taxation, and someone like Representative Gauch has been leading the fight for tax cuts in the legislature, are not opposed to tax cuts. We are opposed to tricking the middle class, that broad range of taxpayers.
What's the trick?
The trick is you're offering them a tax cut for 1 year, and then you're giving the legislature the power to raise their taxes for the rest of eternity. And that's what we have to make sure
Same power the legislature has today as we sit here.
Wouldn't you rather have a tax cut even for 1 year?
Plus, I think what you've done,
my taxes are going to double the next year, obviously.
You put a lot of goodies with this graduated income tax. You've got a lot of goodies that the legislature could handle now if they wanted to. We could handle without a graduated income tax. But I think you put all these bangles and goodies to get people to go for the big tax. Isn't that true?
Isn't that what politics is all about?
Well, beyond that,
that's what we're talking. Of course, that's exactly what it's all about, and that's the game you two are playing.
But that's the way what we believe we've done, and I've been actively involved in the drafting of this initiative.
To the taxpayers.
Wait a second, Representative, wait a second. Let me just make clear let's make sure what's deceitful. What's deceitful is to offer them $53 million in water and property tax relief, to double the child care credit, to double the dependent exemption, to eliminate the double tax that you've opposed on interest and dividends. That's deceitful.
And all they have to do is turn over their wallet to Tax Equity Alliance of Massachusetts.
We could have done that last year. If you remember right, last fall, the governor came in with his $200 million tax cut. You testified before the Committee on Taxation.
You're talking to me.
That's correct. Yes. Which I sit on, and I asked you why you were against giving money back to the hardworking men and women of this Commonwealth, and you said it was throwing money away.
Well, you'll be surprised to hear this, but I actually said those words, but I assume you'll now say what I said after I said those words. Is that the difference between the position I would say we both have on this issue about cutting taxes for 92% of the people is we think it shouldn't result in a cut in public services. We think the wealthiest 8%, 199,000 people, including him, by the way, should pay, and including me, by the way, will pay more to fund it. What the tax cuts you've supported, including the governor's, the old one and the new one that's pending, would require one of two things: either increase state-sponsored gambling, which is dead, or reduction of public spending. We're against that.
Because this year's state revenues are going up 7.2% so far, which is roughly twice inflation. That's an increase in revenues that do not cut services if you simply don't increase the revenues past inflation, but give the money back in the tax cut for low and middle income people that Representative Gauch.
So don't spend it on local aid, don't spend it on cops, don't spend it on school kids.
$16.3 billion. How much do you want? How much more do you want to take from us?
And I think what the governor said on this $200 million tax cut was he would make the cuts, and we've got a at last year $2 billion budget. If we can't find $200 million in a $16+ billion budget,
why doesn't he tell us
we have a very efficient operation, which I don't think we have.
But Representative, this is like 1990 with the CLT tax cut all over again. Cut taxes $200 million, and the governor says, "I'll tell not only the public later, but I'll tell you later what I'll cut." That's not democracy.
You can't use that argument with him, because this is the state representative who found one place to cut, at least that I know you disagree with. This is the person who discovered that we're spending taxpayer money for fertility drugs for welfare mothers, and he's put a stop to it. Almost single-handedly brought it out to the public's attention. You support taxpayer-funded fertility drugs for welfare mothers.
And that's probably why people should vote against the graduated income tax.
Well, it's one example of where the money's going to come from, and that in welfare reform, which you also oppose. Representative Gauch is doing the best he can to find the money. It's only 2.5% of a 7.5% increase in revenues this year.
The more things change, the more things remain the same. Please don't go away. We'll be back in 2 minutes with your calls. Please join us. Taxes will go down for all couples making less than $101,000, all individuals less than $60,000, but don't do it because that horrible legislature someday is going to change it. Let's return to an issue, Barbara, that you talked about a second ago. You leveled two sort of charges. I want to be not unkind. One, that it's you alone in the business community, Mitchell, and number two, Paul Tsongas, who generally is seen as sort of the guru of business, said something like in the Herald. What's the quote again, Barbara?
He said that this is yet another thunderbolt of anti-business ideology that is the last thing this state needs.
Well, this is going to be particularly tough for you to answer. Let's start with Tsongas, because my recollection is you introduced Tsongas when he announced his for the presidency in Lowell, Massachusetts a couple of years ago. Is that so?
That's so.
So is he wrong in this case?
He's dead wrong in this case.
Why?
He's wrong because he is aligning himself with the members of the business community who primarily are interested in not increasing their own personal taxes. And they have a significant pulpit, a bully pulpit, that most people don't have, which is they run large corporations and they have a lot of money to spend of their corporate money to make sure that their personal taxes don't go up and that their employees and their customers don't get a tax break.
So just picture this, folks, all these evil job creators out there, all this small business.
Barbara, wait a second. I didn't say evil. I didn't say they're evil job creators.
Wants to pay more.
You know.
Well, then explain to me why all the others.
Let me ask you a question, Barbara.
The National Federation of Independent Businesses.
Can you stop a moment? Let me ask you a question.
The Chambers of Commerce.
Let me ask you a question. Do I get to ask you a question?
No, of course not. You're not the host. The High Technology Council.
We'll go home.
Small businesses whose
most of the trade groups,
14% of
Barbara,
this thing
you're
passes.
Right. Most of the trade
They're all
groups
opposed to it, but Mitchell Kertzman says it's a good idea. So who are you going to follow? Him or all the rest of the people who are creating the jobs in the state?
Shoot, Mitchell.
Don't tempt me. I'm an anti-gun person. I can't shoot.
You would be. That's another problem.
I'll just respond.
Yes.
You've been quoted as saying on the Jerry Williams show or something like that when my name came up that you wish you had my income. Do you remember saying that? Well, something like that.
No, I'd like to be really rich.
Okay, so I'll say you'd like to be really rich. Would you prefer if you could snap your fingers and have my income or the income of the wealthiest person in the state and the taxes of the wealthiest person in the state? Would you do that?
And if I were as rich as you, would I have to worry about somebody kidnapping my dog or something, holding it for ransom? I'm not sure I want to be all that rich. What was the question again?
Are we going to get an answer to the question?
I guess the answer is no.
I don't want to be as rich as him. What else do you want to talk about?
So you wouldn't want to make more money. You wouldn't want to have more money, even if it meant you paid more taxes. You are so against paying taxes that you'd rather not make more money?
Everybody who makes more money pays more taxes now. If you make 4 times as much as I do, and you make a lot more than that, you're paying more than I am right now.
But Barbara, wait a second.
And you can pay more if you want. If you want to write a check to the Department of Revenue, you can do it now. But why do you want to raise my taxes, his taxes, and all my friends' taxes?
I want to lower your taxes, and I want to lower your taxes. And I want to lower the taxes of 92% of the taxpayers.
For 1 year.
Let me add something here.
Let me ask you one question. As a entrepreneur and a businessman, why is it that every business group that you and I know of in the state, in the country, or let's say in the state, is against the graduated income tax because it will slow the economy, it will stop creating jobs, it'll be bad for the business community? Why are the whole business community all galvanized on this, and you're kind of the Lone Ranger out there saying, no, they're wrong?
First of all, I'm not the Lone Ranger, and as you'll see over the course of this campaign, significant numbers of business people...
Name 3. Right now.
I can name 3 Republicans. Yeah. Arnold Hyatt, former head of Stride Right. Steve Grossman, head of Mass Envelope.
Used to be a Democratic State Committee chairman.
Founder of Lotus Corporation. That's a real radical.
Steve Coit, one of the most prominent venture capitalists, who's significantly interested in raising capital and creating jobs.
Do they all have the kind of capital that gets benefits from your particular package that you drafted, where everybody else is going to have to pay higher capital gains, but your type of company and theirs gets a tax break? Are they in that same
Paul Tsongas,
category?
who you keep quoting, is perhaps the most significant proponent in public policy for lowering capital gains taxes to increase. So is it only that some of the things that Paul is for are right when they agree with you and the rest of them are wrong?
But your proposal increases the capital gains tax for everybody else except your types of businesses.
How do you, if I can ask, if it's so, let's get back to the business issue.
On a guy owning a small family restaurant.
Let's get back to the business issue you raised a minute ago. Every magazine article I've ever read says the most pro-business governments in the world, not the United States, Japan and Germany, both have a graduated income tax. Why aren't they falling into the ocean? Why isn't one falling into the sea? Why are they doing so well if they have a horrible graduated income tax that stifles economic growth?
I think we have a graduated income tax that really is a progressive tax. 20% of our high-end pays 60% of our income tax, state income tax.
Right, and they have 80% of the income.
We have a progressive tax as it is now. The legislature is allowed to have tax breaks for low-income people, and we do that. So I think we have a tax that works in this Commonwealth, and I don't think we ought to change it.
It says progressive, actually, though it's incidentally progressive, as some of those European countries. But the European countries, of course, are looking at 11% unemployment. Is that what we want?
Representative Gauch, and Barbara, as we sit here today, the reality is you can talk progressive till you're blue in the face. Poorest fifth of the population, people making $20,000 a year, pay twice as much of their income to all local and state taxes as millionaires do. Middle income families pay 1.5 times as much. The reality is this grad tax helps offset that regressivity. Isn't it true you're really against it because you're concerned the business guys, the top 8% for the most part, as Mitchell said, simply don't want to pay more, period.
Jim, our Constitution now, our state Constitution, allows the legislature to make corrections for the people that can't afford to pay taxes.
How about the middle class? How about the middle class?
We can make tax breaks. We can do anything we want. We don't have to change and make a graduated
Tell me what you can do
a lot of things.
Tell me what you would do next if someone said to you, Representative, go help the middle class with their tax burden. What would you do under the current system?
Well, number one, the governor's proposed a $200 million tax cut that we can't even get out of committee so that the legislature can vote on.
Doesn't that cut taxes for the wealthy also? And wouldn't, because they pay most of the taxes, they get more of a tax break?
No, I think it was keyed into the middle range.
Absolutely untrue, because you can't do it.
The jobs, for heaven's sake.
Okay, I'm getting a stroke. Al from Newton, you're with us on Talk of New England. Welcome. How are you?
First, I'd like to make a comment.
Please.
Which is, I notice you and Mr. Kertzman are consistently interrupting the other two guests. Why don't you let them finish the questions you ask? I think that's disgusting.
I was actually about to say that I thought they were interrupting us, but I hear what you're saying.
You're interrupting me now.
Okay.
Secondly, I'd like to point out that if Mr. Kertzman knew anything about the history of you and your parasitic organization, he would be very suspicious about becoming your puppet, because that's the way he's coming over. He's sitting there, and you've got him there because he's mouthing all of the stuff that you would like to present.
Well, before he responds to your polite comments, Al, thank you.
Just change the percentages.
Al, before he responds to your polite comments, it'd be nice if you told us what the parasitic history of my organization is, but obviously your courage caused you to hang up the phone.
Wait a minute,
Thanks so much for your
you told
call.
him that was enough. You gave the impression.
He hung up.
I'll answer for him. Thank you for calling, Al, and reminding me to remind everybody that Jim Braude represents the public employee unions, the welfare lobbyists, particularly the Mass Teachers Association, all of the people who raised the income tax or lobbied to raise the income tax from the middle class from 5% to 6.25%, then fought it when we got it back down to 5.95% with Governor Weld. They wanted to increase the sales tax another 1% just a couple of years ago. They lobbied against tax cuts for the senior citizens from their unearned income tax rate. They've lobbied against most of the tax cuts that have appeared before them, and they're always up there wanting more and more of your money.
Let me add to the list of parasites, to use your word and Barbara's. Those are the 68,000 teachers that teach your kids in the public schools. They're real parasites. The Mass Council of Churches, all those people, those are the kind of parasites, to use your word, Al, that we're happy to have on our side. Do you want to comment on this, or it's up to you?
Well, I'm pleased to say that I have a sufficient mind of my own in order to have opposed team on probably the majority of issues that have come before the public policy agenda. So if you are indeed, if I'm your puppet, you are perhaps an ineffective puppeteer.
I'll try to do better. John from Boxford, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yes.
How are you?
Hi, I'm fine.
Good.
I'd like to sort of state a little bit about business in Massachusetts. I have started at least 3 high-tech businesses in Massachusetts and sold them off to other companies. I can point to at least one company that now has 600 or 800 jobs, depending on their business year, that is directly related to people like myself and others who have started these high-tech businesses. Today I run a business which is growing very rapidly. We have 66 people in Boxford. In Beverly. We are a team of R&D people, and we make relatively high salaries. Many of us have our children in private schools because the public schools in this state are abysmal. And they are abysmal because of the bureaucrats and the political nature of school committees in this state. If there is a graduated income tax imposed, we have a very small company. We live in rented facilities in Beverly. There is absolutely no question that myself and others in that company will make the decision to move to New Hampshire. I will sell my house in Boxford, move to New Hampshire. My family has never, and we are immigrants. My grandparents came from Ireland. My other grandparents came from Holland. Throughout our entire family, we have never taken a dime from the government. Most of my nephews and nieces, brothers and sisters, were all in private schools throughout. We do not demand government services. We pay our taxes. We pay them more or less willingly. But the time has come to stop painting us as the parasites, Mr. Brody.
Al from Newton used the term parasite, not me, John.
No, but
John, let me make a suggestion.
What he's pointing out is that you're the ones that give the impression that there's something wrong with people like John.
Now, John, as I said before, and you probably missed this part of the show, federal government, every Western nation, 35 of the 42 states that have an income tax already graduate rates. So why do you believe that this is some radical thing that's going to cause devastation in Massachusetts?
May I interrupt you?
Sure.
I think you should not be proud of the bureaucracy of the federal government and the fact that they suck in $16 billion a year out of the economy. You can't tell me that our government in Washington is efficient. If they had a flat tax, they might have to live within their means. You also referenced Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I've traveled to Japan more than 35 times. And if you would like to live in Japan with their bureaucracy and their very low standard of living in terms of the quality of life, the space that these people live in, they live in 450 square feet on average for a family of 4.
Is that the Grad tax did that? John, let me ask you, does it bother you that when you move to New Hampshire, when this wins, that it's a state that doesn't have public kindergartens for people who are not as fortunate as you? I guess that doesn't matter because you can buy access to private schools for your kids.
Mr. Brody, what bothers me is that I paid last year to the federal government on an income of $175,000, $56,000 in federal income taxes. I do not have tax shelters. I have no deductions. My kids are taking away from me. I have an $11,000 standard deduction, which is knocked down to $2,400 because I am wealthy.
Well, John, we have to take a break, but I should say to you, if this thing becomes law and you choose to invest in Massachusetts companies, you can get very large tax breaks and help create jobs in our Commonwealth as well.
I have
It's
no
probably
interest
not true,
whatsoever.
John, thanks very much for your call. We've got to take a break. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Stay tuned and join us. We're talking about the Grad tax. I should say the temperature in the studio has risen about 15 degrees since the show started. Is there any way we can get that quote back up on the screen? By the way, it's my favorite quote so far of the Grad tax campaign. Those behind the Grad tax are people who have been unsuccessful in their careers, who want to punish those who have been successful in theirs. That's William Foster, Stratus Computers. He also, by the way, is chair of the board of the High Tech Council. He must be talking about you, I guess, Mitchell.
Well, I've been reasonably successful. I certainly don't want to punish any of my colleagues who have been similarly successful. In fact, I'd like to see businesses be more successful. But let me.
Want to go back to John from Boxford?
Well, first of all, John from Boxford has started several companies, and one of the provisions that, as you know, I helped put into this rate structure says that you don't get a tax break just for investment in Massachusetts companies. It's for starting Massachusetts companies. The sweat equity that you get by founding a company and working hard for years, whether it's a high-tech company or whether it's a small family business, you will get a significant capital gains break if you work that business for a long time. So this isn't an incentive just to invest. It's an incentive for people to stay in Massachusetts and to start companies in Massachusetts. And if he lives in New Hampshire, he won't get that benefit, even if his company is in Massachusetts.
The problem there, though, this addresses people that have domicile or have most of their employees working in Massachusetts would get most of their breaks.
The requirement is only 50%, and it's only 50% at the time the investment is made. I think you'd have a hard time finding a startup business in Massachusetts with more than 50%
in a lot of these outfits that are coming into the state now, and I think that's the growth in the Commonwealth now is biotechnology. We're looking to have these companies that really are global companies. They're not going to have all their people in Massachusetts. Those aren't going to do it.
when the investment is made, and the sweat equity is when it's started.
But when they start to hire employees to manufacture what it is they're making, at that point they don't get it anymore. At that point they get an increase in the capital gains tax from what they'd be getting now. It's just your kind of companies, Mr. Kurtzman, who end up getting a tax break, while all those small businesses out there, people with their family, that's right.
The fastest growing companies in Massachusetts and have created more jobs than most companies in Massachusetts in the past several years. Those bad businesses that are creating jobs.
Hey, I want them to have a tax break. I want everyone to have a tax break. You're going to raise the taxes on the other business people, the small businessmen.
You know what you've done? You've stepped in my area of expertise for a change.
Oh, good heaven. Excuse me. I stepped in his area of expertise.
And my area of expertise is capital formation and capital formation for startup businesses and tax policy
and all those other businessmen. What about their area of expertise? I'll tell you what my area of expertise is. I work on Beacon Hill, and I know you cannot trust the Massachusetts legislature.
Even the fellow sitting next to you?
What happens, Mitch, when people, what happens when the hard-working men and women of this state bring home their paycheck and they open up the pay slip and they look and they have now federal income taxes, state income taxes, and local income taxes, because this opens up for local income taxes.
There's another red herring. This campaign is a master. You guys have been so far on the show for about 34 minutes. You haven't said one thing against giving tax cuts to 92% of the people, or against water relief, or against child care. No, all you talk about is
we support
local
those things
options.
right now.
Barbara,
we want to do them right.
If I can finish a sentence, you can finish a sentence.
It's your show.
92. All you talk about is local option income taxes that aren't going to happen. Business provisions that don't exist. Representative, you're a legislator.
Yes.
Let's assume what we do in this provision is, to continue what Mitchell said, is yes, we do dump the capital gains tax break that currently exists. It says you buy a Van Gogh painting that does nothing for Massachusetts. You invest in a company in Mexico, you get a capital gains tax break. What we do have in its place is something that said if you invest in those companies, not all of them, those that have more than 50% of their employees in Massachusetts and do it long term, you get an even larger tax break. If you don't think that's broad enough, why don't you support this thing? Wait, let me finish. That says we reward investment in Massachusetts, not from, and then when it passes, move to expand the thing. You've got Bill Weld up there that obviously would support such a thing. Why not make it better rather than trying to destroy it?
I'm concerned with your capital gains tax for one reason. Number one, a lot of the elderly, let's say we have a single resident elderly person living in a three-decker that she bought years ago and it's been appreciated. It's worth probably $300,000 and she might have paid $20,000 for it. She's going to spend more money, okay?
With all due respect,
her and a lot of other people like her that are retired, that's correct.
Representative, with all due respect, and I hate to do this on the show, if you'd read the bill, you'd realize the one exemption from the change in capital gains is we keep the law exactly as it is when you sell your principal residence, specifically because we're concerned about those senior citizens.
This is what she and her husband had always planned to retire upon.
It's your principal, well, if it isn't your principal residence, that's a business.
People, but for just regular working class people.
Kerry from Essex.
Welcome. Business, their little
Hi, Kerry.
Hi.
How are you?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Thanks. We're having a great time here. How are you?
Sounds good. I'd like to ask Mr. Braude,
you're talking to him.
and I'd like you to be very specific. What percentage of a person's citizen's income do you think the state has a right to take?
I don't think I can never answer that question. I have no idea. I think the answer is we should raise enough money to make sure our kids are well educated, our neighborhoods are safe. I have no idea what that magic number is, Kerry.
And does it ever become enough?
Well, I mean, that's the Barbara line. The answer is, of course it does, but since I can't answer your question and say it's X percent, you're able to respond by saying, does it ever become enough? Of course it becomes enough.
Doesn't it matter what people can afford to pay?
Yeah, but
doesn't that
Representative Gauch, we're not raising another penny in income taxes here. We're asking the wealthiest 8% to pay more so that 92% of the people, including I'm sure most of your constituents, pay less.
Here's the question the caller had. She asked when the taxes get to when do you have enough is enough? I mean, you think you have to look at the other side of the equation. What can people afford to pay?
Exactly
and you get to a point where they can't afford to pay more
taxes. And that's
taxes.
why we're cutting taxes for the middle class, because they can't afford to pay what the legislature is currently charging them.
Why don't you have that local income tax? Like Mr. Manham in Boxford, he could end up paying a Boxford income tax. He says his business is in Beverly. He could have a Beverly income tax. There could be a Mass Water and Sewer District, an MWRA income tax, a county income tax. Now, this is really going to hit the middle income people.
That was true. It really would. Unfortunately, it's not true, Barbara, but that's another wonderful tactic. And
it is absolutely true. That is what he does. He takes away the protection of the Constitution.
Government, in one way or another, takes 60% of our income. I think that's sufficient.
But Kerry,
I get very little from government.
What does that mean? What do you mean you get very little from government?
I require very little from government. I get nothing.
What do you do?
I would get police protection.
Right, and if your house is on fire, I assume you get that, right?
Right.
And do kids in your neighborhood?
No children in school.
But do you care that the kids next door get educated with your tax dollars?
I think there's a better way, actually, than the public school system.
Well, listen, the bottom line, Curry, is I think the only thing we would agree upon, at least in the first year, I want to be fair to you guys, in the first year, this raises as much revenue as the current system, but as I've said repeatedly in the show, this legislature can raise your taxes under the current system. They don't need a graduated income tax to make you unhappier.
That's not true either. Actually, the first year, taxes go up $44 million, so it is not what you just said, so that isn't accurate either. And after that, inflation alone will raise $100 million more a year, because you just sit here with the graduated income tax, and inflation will push you into a higher tax. No, it isn't. It is not indexed.
The brackets are indexed for inflation.
Not in the constitutional amendment, which is the only thing that's going to be still in existence 4 or 5 years from now.
Does that exist in the Constitution of any other governing body that you're aware of?
All you had to do, Mr. Kertzman, is put a sentence in the constitutional amendment that says this is indexed for inflation. You didn't do it. And you know why?
Would you be supporting it?
And you know why? Because
is that the big problem?
It wouldn't exist because they wouldn't support it. Inflation becomes their best friend.
Would you support it?
Of course not.
Joel from Milton, thanks for joining us on Talk of New England. Welcome. Joel, you with us?
Yeah, I'm from Milton.
I know you are. I just said Joel from Milton, so hello.
Okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'd like to make a couple of observations, if I could.
Sure.
And I'd also like to ask Barbara if there's some way I can get a hold of her, because I'd love to speak to her sometime, because I think she's one of the greatest women that I've seen around.
She's also probably one of the greatest people, not just women, from your perspective. I'm going to show you what kind of person I am. I'm going to give you her phone number. It's 617. This is unbelievable. 248-0022.
That's right.
Does that show you what kind of guy I am?
You're great. Now let me just make my comments.
Yes, Joel.
The state of Massachusetts is in the worst condition that I've ever seen it, and I've been living in here 55 years. And unfortunately, I think it's because of the bureaucrats and the bloodsuckers in the government. It's the most incompetent run organization. And as a taxpayer, I don't mind paying taxes to an efficiently run government, but I resent what I consider a most incompetent government, especially when you got Bulger in there, Weld and Hatchbarger, who put people to work and rob the public of their funds. And they constantly lie and they never tell you the truth.
I know you're going to connect this to the graduated income tax, correct?
Graduated income tax, I would say that if they told the truth and put it down in black and white, so that when we voted for it, we would get what's the truth, instead of it always being twisted around and we end up getting something lied that they forgot to put this in, or they're adding another tax or something like that. I think something like that would be worthwhile.
Joel, it's in black and white. It's on the ballot. You can read it yourself.
Well, you say it's on black and white, but I've seen black and white stuff too. Like Clinton, when he was running for president, said he was going to raise taxes and then he was going to cut expenses. He's raised taxes, but he hasn't cut any expenses. So he's lying. And as far as his other stuff, chasing women or something, that don't even bother me if he ran the government efficiently, which most of these guys can't do, too.
You're aware, by the way, the reason he chases women is because we have a graduated income tax on the federal level. Are you aware of that?
Well, I didn't know that.
Joel, thank you very much for your phone call. I appreciate it.
But that's how he got to raise taxes. I mean, it's very easy for the federal government to raise taxes. It's easy to do with the graduated income tax. If they have it in Massachusetts, this is how it works. 1 year they come and raise taxes for people earning, say, $30,000 to $32,000. The next year they come in people $35,000 to $38,000. Every year they raise taxes, ratcheting it up on one income group at a time. It's beautiful. I can see why Jim Braude and the public employee unions love it.
That's just not the track record in other governing bodies that have a graduated income tax.
Are you aware of the fact, well, you asked me, when I was in front of your committee a couple of weeks ago, Representative Gauch, somebody sitting to your left or right asked a question like this: isn't it true that graduated income tax states have an easier time raising taxes? Well, we actually did a little research. Since 1986, 8 years, I obviously can count real well, 8 years, 80% of the states with a flat tax like ours have raised taxes. More than half of the states with a graduated tax like we want, that horrible graduated tax, have actually cut taxes.
That's because they've had to, because their taxes were so much higher than the other states in the first place. If I can finish a sentence with the representative.
The basic notion is, I assume, and I can't believe you don't really believe this in your heart, taxes are raised when you and your colleagues decide you got to do it because things are at risk, and taxes are cut when you believe you have enough money to send the money back home. It's political will. It has nothing to do with the system. Isn't that really the truth?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. As a representative sitting in the legislature, it's a lot easier to raise taxes on a smaller constituency than everyone.
Well, wait a second. Hold on. Wait right now.
Always easier.
Wait.
Plus, let me ask
you can do it now,
thing.
Representative. There's small. Wait, let me finish the thought. There's small constituencies that you can hit right now if you choose. Hit people that have interest in dividends. Only raise their rate. That's without a graduated income tax. There are tons of little subgroups you can hit.
I'm talking about a major tax increase.
Well, let me give you, wait, let me finish.
The problem with the
Barbara mentioned a minute ago that the way they're really going to get them is this indexing that's just in law. Wait, it's going to disappear. Well, wait. When indexing disappears, when you and your colleagues at 4 a.m. cause it to disappear, I've got news for you. Everybody's taxes go up. Everybody. Well, if everybody's taxes go up, how does your argument that you're going to pick off one group at a time fly?
That's just another problem with the graduated income tax, indexing. And you know what's going to happen. The minute indexing is taken away, the legislature is going to be able to raise taxes without taking a vote. That's an easy out for the legislature.
Why do you even go to work? Why do you pass any laws that you think are good if your fear is, oh my God, I'm doing something good for 6 million people in Massachusetts, but if I do it, God, we may come back tomorrow and change it. Why bother to go to work to begin with? Do something good and protect it.
You know why I'm concerned?
Why is that?
I go down there and work for what I consider the working men and women of the Commonwealth, but I see things on a daily basis that go against the working men and women of the Commonwealth. Okay?
Well, let's cut their taxes.
We started a lottery 21 years ago that said all the money would go back to cities and towns. It's not all going back to cities and towns. So why then, if the graduated income tax comes in, are we going to do what we say we're going to do up front? We're not going to do that.
But what are you doing? What you tried to do last week on this lottery issue is you as a legislator, as an elected representative, tried to fix the system.
That's right.
If people try to violate the spirit of a graduated income tax that cuts taxes for 92% of your people, why don't you do the same thing? Protect it.
How far did I get when I tried to correct the system?
Well, it was corrected last week, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't corrected.
Wayne from Foxborough, you're with us on Talk of New England. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. One thing about this whole argument on the graduated income tax that I think oftentimes people in the business community seem not to understand. No matter how much wealth there is out there in the system, it is finite. It doesn't go on forever. And the more you have people at the top making large amounts of money, the less there is for everybody else. That means the less there is for people to buy the products that these businessmen and women are making. And this leads us into the whole cycle of recession that we've seen over and over again in our culture. The idea of instituting a graduated income tax, taking some of that money and recycling it back into the system so that people can then have more money to spend on the things that business makes, seems just to make sense to me from a business point of view, doesn't it?
Where did you get that idea?
Can I quickly, because we only have 30 seconds till the break.
First of all, although this is thankfully the first caller who's actually been supportive of my position, in fact, wealth is not finite. Wealth grows. That's why economies grow and GDP grows. However, after the break, I would like to address this issue of
putting money in the pockets of
where wealth exists and where wealth doesn't
Wayne,
exist.
thanks very much for your call. We've got to take a break. One more segment with these people, so if you want to join us, you got to call now. Stay tuned. Before we get back to Mitchell wanted to speak to that business issue, you would agree the fourth reason that Jim Braude is for it is really the most important reason to oppose the grad tax, isn't it?
Well, Jim Braude and his members, the Mass Teachers Association,
all
the
those
Public Employee
parasites,
Unions,
all
and
those
the welfare lobbyists.
I meant to finish the sentence. You wanted to speak. You actually agreed with this guy who called for a minute ago, Wayne from Foxborough, in terms of his conclusion, but disagreed on his reasoning.
Well, the conclusion is that the effect of this rate structure is that it will basically shift $600 million, of taxation from the top 8%, who will pay more, and the bottom 92% will pay less. The bottom 92% then will effectively have $600 million more dollars. They are more likely to spend that. They have what's called a higher marginal propensity to consume than the wealthy people are to change their spending
Even
habits.
Bill Weld said that, I want you to know, a couple of weeks ago.
So it's
small
good for the
businesses.
economy. It's good for the small business. It's $600
They're
million
spending it.
more.
They're not saving it. Therefore, it can't be borrowed to invest. They aren't investing it. They aren't creating jobs with it.
Of course they're creating
I'm all for
jobs.
spending.
Barbara, if $600 million is spent at the local contractor, the local dry goods salesperson, the local retailer, obviously that's helping them hire people and expand.
Unless they're paying a 14% income tax rate, which small business will be doing under this, in which case there won't be any small business
I
to
interrupted
spend it
Mitchell
at.
now. Go ahead, Mitchell.
But let me tell you why I particularly support the graduated income tax, which is that the past couple of decades have been very, very good to me and my colleagues, the people that have been quoted on this program and the quotations. They've been very good to us. And the American way has traditionally been that this system works because the great middle class is always moving up. The wealthy are always getting wealthier. That's always been true. But over the course of this century, the reason this country is as great as it has been is because the middle class has been moving forward. Their standard of living has improved. But that stopped happening. The middle class is sliding backwards now, and the gap between the very wealthy, myself and my colleagues, and the people in the middle class is growing. And I think that the natural extension of that is an unhealthy system. It's a system like Mexico or Brazil, where the people with money live behind guarded walls to protect themselves from the people who work for them. Peter Lynch said recently that the American system used to work well for 90% of Americans, and the 10% are the ones we created this social safety net for. Peter Lynch says now that it doesn't work anymore for 35% of Americans. This graduated income tax is a very, very small way to have the people that have done so well over the past couple of decades pay a little bit more, so that the people who really genuinely have to struggle, the people that are out there listening to this program, can afford to pay.
Can I please?
But you know what's happening?
Wait a minute. The federal government
that's going to go out, and the guy that's going to get 1, 2, or 3 jobs, really to get those bills paid and get ahead, those are the guys you're going to hit with.
That's because you haven't read the bill, Representative.
I've read the bill.
Those are the people
those are the guys that are going to get into another
Can I say something here? If what you just said is true, then why is the federal government with its graduated income tax presiding over the same kind of economy you have just described? The fact is, the one thing that protects taxpayers in Massachusetts is the non-graduated income tax that lets the low-income people become middle class, and the middle class people aspire to become rich like you. And you're absolutely right about one thing. The rich don't have to worry about this. They can take care of themselves. They can hire accountants. They can leave the state. They can shelter their money.
Representative Gauch said they pay 60%. Representative Gauch said they just paid 60% of the taxes. So how are they escaping all these taxes?
They're not. In this state, we're paying the second highest income taxes in the country.
That's
which is bad enough.
That's only because Massachusetts relies disproportionately to other states on the personal income tax to raise revenue.
Our total tax burden is also
Our total
extraordinarily high
tax
in the
burden
state.
is about right in the middle of all
It's the
states.
6th highest in the country per capita.
That's not true.
Certainly.
John from Needham, join us. Break this up. How are you?
Good afternoon.
Hi.
I'd just like to bring up one point and hope that the panelists would discuss it a little bit. And that's the Constitutional Convention coming up. I think it's on the 25th. I don't know if it's been mentioned.
We mentioned at the beginning of the show, and what John is talking about, which I'm sorry I've stayed away from, 2 separate questions. First time in the 5 times this issue has been on the ballot. It's all 4 prior times. It's just been an attempt to amend the Constitution. This time we want to amend the Constitution, dump that flat tax, allow for graduation, require graduation actually, and then set a specific rate structure in black and white. What John from Needham is talking about is what we opened the show with, which is, while the rate structure gets on the ballot with just more signatures, the legislature can't stop it. That if the legislature doesn't meet in Constitutional Convention, either this coming Wednesday or sometime in the next couple of months, the constitutional amendment is dead, and whether you're for this issue or against this issue, you don't get a chance to vote. So we can just revisit it quickly.
Can I just say something real quick?
Sure you can.
I would like the listeners, that not on the panel, but the listeners that are out there listening in New England, to contact their legislators and their senators to find out how they're going to vote on the Constitutional Convention, because that's where the key is. Thank you very much, and I'll listen to the rest of the program.
Well, I appreciate your call, but I think the interesting thing, by the way, is since the 4 of us have agreed on virtually nothing over this 55 minutes or 50 minutes so far, is the one thing we all agree on, whether right, left, pro or anti-graduated income tax, is when you get 100,000 signatures on a question that goes to the Constitutional Convention, at least legislators, they don't have an obligation to vote yes or no. They have an obligation, we believe, at least to vote. That's one thing we all agree upon?
Yes.
Yeah, and we know on this particular Constitutional Convention we only need 50 votes to get this passed, but it's not the problem of the convention and who votes on it. It's going to get it out to have the convention to make the vote.
Right, so but I have to say...
it's in the hands of just a few people on Beacon Hill now.
Well, except, that's been the issue. One of the questions that's arisen is, is Bulger stopping this? Is Flaherty stopping this? Wouldn't you agree there were 132 legislators who voted for this thing in the first Constitutional Convention to 132 to 39, a huge margin. Wouldn't you think if those 132 legislators stood up, and if you who were an opponent stood up to make it 133 and say, we want a right to vote? We want a right to vote. Do you think Bulger or Flaherty would resist that charge? I think not.
Why would they change now? I sit on taxation committee. We have 600 bills that haven't got out of committee so that men and women can vote on them. I mean, what's the difference there? I mean, as far as I'm concerned now, with the imbalance in representatives in the legislature, with so many Democrats, so few Republicans, it's in gridlock. I mean, the system is not working. We're not getting bills out of committee, so why should they do this?
Well, how about your governor, by the way? Bill Weld is against the graduated income tax. Bill Weld excoriated the legislature for the same thing you talked about earlier, Barbara, the fact that they killed term limits without a vote. Have either of you heard Bill Weld stand up and say, I think it's critical that this legislature vote on the graduated income tax?
You don't know yet that they aren't going to vote. He'll probably call them back if they don't vote, but keep in mind, he tried to call them back on term limits too. They simply ignore him. There's nothing the governor can do to get them back in if Bill Bulger doesn't want to vote on this thing.
The power of persuasion. He's a pretty powerful guy.
Please. And this is why the graduated income tax isn't going to work. You think you're dealing with rational, reasonable people up there? You're not. You're dealing with the legislative leadership. And furthermore, when people have to understand, when they see this constitutional amendment on the ballot, if in fact it does get on the ballot, and it should at least get a vote in the con, and you see the statute with the tax cuts in, don't forget, if you don't vote for the constitutional amendment, Jim Braude and Mr. Kertzman will not allow you to have those tax cuts. The only reason those tax cuts are there is so that you will vote for the constitutional amendment and thereby give them the power to raise your taxes forever.
Well, as you know, we don't have the power to allow or disallow anything, but you should, and with all due respect, finish the sentence. Why, as I said to Representative Gauch before, why do, at least I oppose those tax cuts without a graduated income tax? There's nothing to do with the constitutional
Because
amendment.
your members want the money.
No, it has to do with the fact that our view is...
They want more money for welfare?
Our view is, well, whether it's more money for welfare recipients, whether it's more money for public schools, whatever people care about in government, and I think most people care more than Curry from Essex a little while ago, whatever they care about, our view is it should be funded and revenue neutral, not funded by asking another $400, $500, $600 million to be taken out of the public sector. That's the basic difference between the Weldian view of tax cutting and the graduated income tax view of tax cutting.
I'll say it one more time. This year revenues are going up naturally 7.5%. Inflation is what, around 3.5%? So simply don't increase spending in these areas and give the money back to the people who earned it in the first place.
We only have about a minute left. Play political prognosticator. Let's assume this gets through the Constitutional Convention. What's your prediction of what happens in the fall and why?
I think it goes down big time because I think people will realize that they're giving an awful lot of to the legislature to play with the tax system, and I think people are fed up, and I don't think they want to take that chance.
Barbara, quick one from you.
I don't think people are going to vote for a graduate income tax unless they fall for the trick that you and Mr. Kertzman have put forward here that tells them they'll get a tax cut 1 year and then they have to pay higher taxes for the rest of their lives.
She called you Mr. Kertzman. I want to do it too. Mr. Kertzman, what do you think?
That's the first time you've ever done that.
And the last time.
I believe that this is the year, the first time in 5, that it will be seen by the public that the emperor has no clothes in the arguments against the grad tax, and it will win.
But I want you to know, we've got to close this segment. I want to thank Mitchell Kertzman from PowerSoft, Barbara Anderson from Citizens for Limited Taxation, Representative Gauch from Shrewsbury. I said Grouch. That really is a really horrible thing. That was not intended. But I want to say I came into this...
call you Jim Braude.
And I know you'll believe this. I came into this discussion with a complete open mind. And after listening to all three of you, I'm going to vote for this thing in November. This is good for the people. Thanks for everybody. I really appreciate it. But you stay tuned. Joining me next on the Reporter's Corner, Bob Connolly, head of the State House Bureau for the Herald, and Upendra Mishra of the Boston Business Journal. Do not go away. Thanks.